American Pickle is a new dramedy that is streaming exclusively on HBO Max at the moment. This movie is directed by Brandon Trost, I think is his name, and it stars Seth Rogen, Do any of you guys actually like pickles? You know, I used this jar for the thumbnail of this video. I don't actually think these are real pickles. It says it's hamburger dill chips, which I guess technically is a form of pickle, but it's probably not. Do you guys like pickles though? You guys are a big fan of pickles? I'm not really a big pickle fan, so that's why I picked these and I said, hey, it looks green. Pickle shit. The story here is a fish out of water story. It takes place way back in the day. Seth Rogen plays a Jewish immigrant named Herschel. And Herschel lives with his wife and unborn child in Brooklyn, New York back in 1919, I think is the date. I can't remember if that's the actual date, but it is what it is. He lives in Brooklyn, New York back in the 1900s, and he works in a pickle factory. One thing leads to another, and he accidentally falls into a giant vat of pickle brine, and somehow this pickle brine preserves his body perfectly for 100 years. 100 years later, Herschel wakes up in the modern day. He's perfectly preserved. He has no idea what's going on, but he does know that the world that he left is not the same as the world he lives in now. He does have one living relative, played also by Seth Rogen. His character's name is Ben. He's his last living descendant. Ben has to try to help Herschel figure things out about this new world, but at the same time, he has to try to figure out some things about himself that maybe he didn't know before. And so, again, fish out of water and bonding story, here we go. Seth Rogen is a guy that probably has about as polarizing a history and as up and down a track record with his movies and his comedy as anybody else that I can remember in recent memory. Depending on who you ask about this dude, he's either like the most unfunny pothead that you've ever heard in your life, or he's the funniest shit drunk uncle that you just wish you could smoke weed with all the time. Like, there's no in between. I would consider myself somewhat of a fan of Seth Rogen. I mean, I enjoy the dude. I love his energy. I think his laugh is really hilarious. And so I was looking forward to that in this movie. People, it is not as easy portraying two different people as you would think it is. Like, there's a lot of nuance that has to go into it. And I was impressed, not just with the way he handled himself in the dramatic scenes, but also the funny scenes, and also the accent that his character has, like Herschel has from back in the day. That accent is heavy and it kind of works, and he doesn't drop it the entire movie. It's convincing. It sounds and feels authentic, and I gotta give credit to Seth Rogen for that, because most people don't really think of him that highly as an actor, but in this movie, he definitely shows off some impressive acting chops. This movie is directed by Brandon Trost, and I think he has a background in cinematography. He's also a guy that has frequently worked with Seth Rogen on some of his other projects. In terms of the cinematography for this movie, I gotta say, it's a decent, well-shot looking movie. Some excellent lighting. He does use different aspect ratios depending on what time period he's depicting. I think Michael Giacchino, or Giacchini, however, Michael G, I've said this before, I mess up his name all the time. Michael G, I think, composed the score for this movie. I gotta say, it's a very entertaining, melodic, bouncy score to listen to. This movie is kind of funny. I won't say that this movie is like laugh out loud hilarious, but there's definitely a lot of humor to be found. Not just in the premise, which is fish out of water, which is something that you've probably seen 1,000 times before. A lot of the best humor does come from that trope, because this movie understands what is funny about that, and it executes it at a very high level. I definitely got some good laughs out of this one. A few belly ones. Most of the time I wasn't dying, but I was entertained. That is something to appreciate about the screenplay for this movie, is that it is funny. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and it does have some self-awareness. A movie like this that has a ridiculous premise like this, like a guy getting preserved in pickle juice for 100 years, definitely you need some self-awareness to pull that off, and luckily this movie does. Unfortunately, this movie definitely had some issues that kept me from fully embracing it, wrapping my arms around it, smoking a blunt with Seth Rogen as it would happen. Rogen's character Ben in this movie, it was very difficult to gravitate towards him. It was very difficult to find reasons throughout the runtime to really get invested in him as a character. I guess that some of that is by design, because of the way the movie focuses on the other Seth Rogen, Herschel, and the way that it tries to build its story. Definitely throughout the movie, it tries to pit these two as like two sides of the same coin, kind of. In this movie, I just found myself caring a lot less about Ben's side of the coin than I cared about Herschel. Herschel, to me, was a much more entertaining character, and he was a character that I did somewhat empathize with when you see how his story plays out. The biggest problem I have with this movie, though, is the violent and absurd shifts in tone. Like, this movie is all over the place. I get that it's a ridiculous premise, and you sometimes have to have a suspension of disbelief when you're talking about a movie like this. And I feel like even within the movie kind of plays fast and loose with the rules of its world and of the story that it's trying to show. And some parts of the movie were just so over the top and so unrealistic that it did take me out of the movie, because the situations and scenarios that were playing out, I just couldn't separate my mind from it and be like, okay, you know what? Wait, is this still a real movie, or is is this a parody? Because some parts of this movie definitely come across as a parody. And because the movie was not consistent with its tone, I do feel like my interest in the movie and some of its characters did wane from scene to scene, because sometimes it just kept taking me out of the experience. A winning and charming performance from Seth Rogen. In fact, if there is one word to describe this movie, it's charming. An American Pickle was a decent, entertaining movie, slightly above average. I'm gonna give this one the rating of Daily Planet. Don't forget our pickle talk from the beginning of the video. Please like and subscribe to the Superfan Show. And if you like what you see, tell me how you feel and stay tuned to hear more from the Man of Steel. Peace.